In 1823, Jedediah Smith crossed 300 miles of Rocky Mountain wilderness with a bare-mauled scalp hanging by a thread, surviving on traps he built from willow branches and rawhide strips. Today, most folks couldn't catch a rabbit with a grocery store gift card. But here's the twist. These lost mountain man tools didn't just feed families, they built the American frontier. Number 14 on this list could bring down a 400-pound black bear using nothing but a log and gravity. And number 3 was so effective that modern game wardens have banned it in 38 states. These 25 tools and traps passed from father to son around campfires from the Appalachians to the Rockies for over a century. Then they vanished. Hit that subscribe button before we start, because what you're about to learn could save your life if you ever got lost in the woods. Let's count down. The rabbit stick, sometimes called a throwing club or kiley, was the first weapon a frontier boy ever learned to use. Carved from seasoned hickory or Osage orange, it weighed just under a pound and measured roughly 2 feet long with a slight curve that made it fly true. A skilled mountain man could drop a grouse at 30 yards or break a rabbit's spine mid-stride. In 1806, Lewis and Clark recorded Shoshone hunters bringing down jackrabbits with sticks while their horses were still at a walk. The beauty of the rabbit stick was its silence. No powder smoke, no crack of a rifle, no spooked game for miles around. A hunter could work a draw all morning and come home with 5 or 6 small animals for the stew pot. Ozark families carried them well into the 1920s, passing carved sticks down through generations. Today, they've been replaced by shotguns and store-bought meat. But that curved piece of hickory hanging by the cabin door once meant the difference between eating and going hungry. Number 24. The turkey wing bone call was the oldest game call in the American woods, made from the hollow radius and ulna of a wild gobbler harvested the season before. A mountain man would boil the bones clean, scrape the marrow with a sharpened twig, and fit the 3 pieces together with pine pitch to form a calling tube no longer than his pinky finger. The sound it produced was almost indistinguishable from a real hen, a soft yelp that drew longbeards in from half a mile away at first light. Cherokee hunters in the southern Appalachians had been using these calls for 400 years before European settlers arrived, and the technique passed quickly between the two peoples. Every hunter kept his call tucked inside his powder horn to keep it dry. Modern slate and box calls replaced them after 1900. They were mass-produced and easier to learn. But old-timers in West Virginia still claim a proper wing-bone call made from your own bird has a purity of tone that factory calls cannot match. The skill of making one vanished with the generation that last needed it to eat. Number 23. The grunt tube, hand-carved from a section of river cane or elderberry with the pith pushed out, was the deer hunter's secret during the November rut. A mountain man would hollow out a 5-inch piece of cane, stretch a thin strip of rawhide over one end as a reed, and bind it with sinew. When blown correctly, it produced the low, guttural grunt of a buck chasing a doe, a sound that could bring a cautious 8-pointer charging across a creek bottom. In the Cumberland Gap region during the 1830s, these calls were considered so valuable that a well-tuned one could be traded for a jug of whiskey or a pound of gunpowder. The skill was in the reed tension. Too tight, and the call squeaked like a rabbit. Too loose, and it bleated like a sheep. Every hunter carved his own, and every hunter claimed his call was the best in the holler. Commercial grunt calls made from injection-molded plastic replaced them after World War II. The carving knowledge, once common as pocket lint, is now held by a handful of traditionalists who learned from grandfathers who remembered. Number 22. The sinew-backed bow was the long-range weapon of choice for mountain men who could not afford powder and lead. Built from a stave of Osage orange or Pacific yew, the bowyer would scrape the wood down to a tapered limb, then glue strips of hand-pounded deer sinew along the back using hide glue rendered from hooves. The sinew contracted as it dried, pre-stressing the bow to throw an arrow harder and farther than plain wood. A properly built sinew-backed bow pulled 60 pounds and could drive a stone-tipped arrow through a buffalo's rib cage at 40 yards. Jim Bridger himself was said to carry one for silent hunting in Blackfoot country, where a rifle shot would bring war parties running. The entire process of building one took 3 months of patient work. Today, no more than a few hundred people in North America know how to do it properly. The craft survives in pockets of traditional archers, but the everyday knowledge that let a 12-year-old boy build his own bow from a backyard tree has disappeared entirely. Number 21. The figure 4 deadfall trigger was the first trap every mountain man taught his son to build. Using only a hatchet and a pocket knife, a boy could carve 3 sticks, an upright, a diagonal, and a trigger stick notched at precise angles that would hold up a 50-pound rock or log until an animal brushed the baited stick. The whole apparatus cost nothing and weighed less than a biscuit. In the 1840s, trappers in the Rocky Mountain fur trade would set dozens of figure 4 deadfalls overnight while they ran their steel beaver traps, bringing in pine martens, fishers, and ermine without firing a shot. The trigger geometry was everything. Too shallow a notch, and the rock fell too easily, crushing the bait. Too deep, and the animal could steal the bait without springing the trap. A master could cut all 3 sticks in under 2 minutes with nothing but a folding knife. The knowledge spread through Boy Scout manuals into the 1950s, then vanished when trapping became a commercial enterprise requiring licenses and factory traps. Today, fewer than 1 in 100 outdoorsmen can build a working figure 4 from scratch. Number 20. The powder horn was the mountain man's most personal possession, more guarded than his rifle and more decorated than his coat. Hollowed from a cow or buffalo horn and plugged with a hand-whittled wooden stopper, it held about a pound of black powder, enough for roughly 80 shots. A good horn had to be scraped translucent so the hunter could see how much powder remained by holding it to the sun. Many were carved with maps, the owner's name, religious verses, or the silhouettes of the mountains the hunter had crossed. At the 1833 Green River Rendezvous, trappers paid as much as $6, nearly a month's wages, for an elaborately scrimshawed horn made by a skilled engraver. The horn had to be kept bone dry because wet powder was worthless and could get a man killed. Every hunter developed his own technique for pouring a measured charge into the muzzle without spilling a grain. When metallic cartridges arrived after the Civil War, the powder horn became obsolete almost overnight. The scrimshaw tradition died with it. Number 19. The possibles bag was a leather satchel slung across the chest. It carried everything a mountain man might possibly need to reload his rifle or to survive a night in the open. Inside went his flint and steel, a wad of charred cloth for tinder, patch material cut from old linen shirts, extra flints, a small bone-handled patch knife, a ball screw for extracting stuck lead, and perhaps a twist of tobacco or a strip of jerked venison. The bag was typically made from deerskin, with the hair left on, tanned with brain solution until it was soft as flannel. By 1830, every trapper heading up the Missouri carried one, and the contents told you everything about the man's experience. a greenhorn's bag rattled with unnecessary gadgets. A veteran's held only what he had used in the last 90 days. The possibles bag represented a philosophy of self-reliance that has no equivalent today. Modern hunters carry plastic pouches in nylon day packs, but the careful curation of essential tools, each one chosen after hard lessons learned in the field, is a knowledge that faded when survival stopped being a daily requirement. The ball mold was the device that let a mountain man make his own ammunition wherever he was, turning bars of soft lead into perfectly round rifle balls. Forged from iron by a gunsmith and hinged like a pair of pliers, the mold had two halves that clamped together with a spherical cavity inside and a small pouring hole at the top. The trapper would melt lead in an iron ladle over his campfire, pour the molten metal into the mold, wait 10 seconds for it to solidify, then snap the halves apart to release a gleaming silver sphere. Each mold was sized to one specific rifle, typically 50 or 54 caliber, and could produce 200 balls in an afternoon. A pound of lead cost about 8 cents in St. Louis in 1835 and made roughly 16 rifle balls. The ability to cast your own ammunition meant that a single shipment of lead at the spring rendezvous could keep a brigade of trappers supplied for an entire year. When factory-loaded cartridges took over after 1870, ball molds became curiosities. Today, fewer Americans cast their own bullets than keep bees. Number 17. The patch knife was a tiny blade, usually no more than 3 inches long, that every muzzle-loading hunter wore on a leather thong around his neck. Its sole purpose was to cut the cloth patch that wrapped each rifle ball as it was loaded into the barrel, trimming the excess fabric flush with the muzzle before the ball was rammed home. The patch sealed the bore, gripped the rifling, and made the rifle deadly accurate out to 200 yards. Every trapper kept his patch knife razor sharp because a ragged cut meant a patch that would tear, a ball that would fly wide, and maybe a meal missed or a grizzly not stopped. The knives were often made by the trapper himself from a file or a broken razor, with handles of antler or bone. In the fur trade journals kept by men like Osborne Russell, the patch knife was mentioned more often than the rifle itself. When the muzzle loader vanished, so did the patch knife, along with the precise loading rituals that had defined American rifle shooting for a century. Number 16. The Hawken Rifle was built in the Hawken Brothers shop at the corner of Washington and 2nd Street in St. Louis, and it was the rifle that won the West. Weighing 10 pounds, with a 38-inch octagonal barrel and in .54 caliber, it could drop a buffalo at 200 yards, and it was accurate enough to hit a playing card at 100 yards. A new Hawken cost $25 in 1840, roughly 3 months' wages for a laborer, and trappers would go into debt to own one. Jim Bridger, Kit Carson, and Jedediah Smith all carried Hawkens. The rifle was known for its reliability in the worst conditions, freezing rain, blizzards, and alkali dust, where cheaper guns would fail. When the Civil War brought mass-produced breech-loading cartridge rifles, the handmade Hawken became a relic. Between 1815 and 1858, the Hawken brothers built roughly 5,000 rifles, each one hand-fitted to its owner. Today, original Hawkens sell for upwards of $100,000 at auction. But the men who knew how to load, shoot, and maintain them are long gone. And the craft of building a rifle by hand from rough steel and curly maple has almost entirely disappeared from American life. The Newhouse No. 4 beaver trap was the tool that fueled the Rocky Mountain fur trade. It was a heavy steel leg-hold trap weighing 5 pounds, with jaws that spread 7 inches wide. Manufactured by the Oneida community in New York starting in 1848, a Newhouse number 4 cost $1.50 wholesale and could last 20 years if kept oiled and free of rust. A trapper would set it in shallow water near a beaver slide anchored to a heavy stake with a twig dipped in castoreum bait leaning over the pan. When the beaver touched the pan to investigate, the jaws snapped shut on a foreleg and the trap held fast until the hunter returned. In a good season, a trapper could take 400 beaver pelts, each worth $4 to $6 in St. Louis, earning a year's wages in 3 months of brutal labor. The Oneida factory closed in 1925, and modern trappers use lighter, faster traps with padded jaws. The skill of reading beaver sign, knowing where to set, how to disguise scent, and how to handle a struggling 60-pound rodent with bare hands in freezing water passed into history with the last of the old-time trappers. Number 14. The log deadfall, sometimes called a Samson trap or a bear fall, was the biggest trap a mountain man ever built. Using a freshly cut log, weighing 300 to 500 pounds and propped up with a heavy figure-4 trigger, a trapper could crush a 400-pound black bear in an instant. The bait, usually a chunk of spoiled meat or a honey-smeared stick, was placed so the bear had to reach directly under the deadfall. When the trigger released, the log fell 3 or 4 feet and broke the bear's spine before it could react. In the southern Appalachians during the 1820s, bear hide sold for $3 and the rendered fat for another $2, making a single successful deadfall worth a week's work. The construction took 2 men a full day of cutting, notching, and balancing. Set them wrong and the log fell on its own, wasting the site. Set them right and they worked for decades. The last working bear deadfalls in North America were used in the Great Smoky Mountains as late as the 1940s. Then they were outlawed as cruel, and the knowledge vanished within a generation. Number 13. Castoreum was the mountain man's secret weapon, a thick, yellow-brown musk extracted from the scent glands of the beaver itself. When a trapper killed a beaver, he would carefully remove the 2 glands near the tail, tie them off with sinew, and hang them to cure over the smoky side of his campfire for a week. The resulting paste, smeared on a trigger twig, was absolutely irresistible to other beavers, who would cross a creek and climb out of the water just to investigate. By the 1830s, 1 ounce of prime castoreum could sell for $5 in St. Louis, more than the pelt of the beaver that produced it. Different trappers guarded their own bait recipes, adding cloves, cinnamon, or wild anise to create blends they swore were superior. Joe Meek was said to have a castoreum mix so potent it would draw beaver from 2 miles downstream. When beaver hats went out of fashion in 1840 and the fur trade collapsed, castoreum lost its market overnight. Today it survives mostly as a flavoring agent in perfumes and food. The art of blending it for trapping is known to perhaps 100 people in the entire country. Number 12. The pit trap, dug 6 feet deep with sharpened stakes pointing up from the bottom, was the ambush trap of the deep wilderness. A mountain man would excavate a pit roughly 3 feet wide and 6 feet long along a known game trail, drive stakes of seasoned hickory into the floor, and cover the opening with a lattice of thin sticks topped with leaves and grass. When an elk or deer stepped on the covering, it collapsed, and the animal fell onto the stakes. But the pit trap was outlawed by most states by 1900 because it killed indiscriminately, taking livestock, dogs, and occasionally children along with game animals. In the remote hollows of Kentucky and West Virginia, they were still used as late as the 1920s by mountain families who needed meat and had no ammunition. The digging alone took 3 days in hard ground, and the stakes had to be renewed every season. The knowledge of how to build and disguise one, passed down from Native American hunters, is now extinct outside of a handful of survival schools. The spring pole snare, also called a twitch-up, used the stored energy of a bent sapling to yank a trapped animal into the air, killing it quickly and keeping it safe from scavengers. A mountain man would bend down a young birch or maple about as thick as his thumb, tie a trigger mechanism to the top, and run a braided sinew snare loop through the trigger so it hung across a game trail at the height of a rabbit's head. When the animal stepped through the loop, its forward motion tripped the trigger. The sapling snapped upright, and the animal was hoisted 3 feet off the ground before it knew what had happened. A single trapper could set 30 or 40 spring pole snares along a mile of trail and check them in 2 hours the next morning. In Maine's North Woods during the 1860s, snares like these provided the bulk of a logging camp's meat supply. The geometry of the trigger, which had to hold under tension but release at the slightest touch, required an understanding of leverage that most modern outdoorsmen have simply never learned. The box trap, built from split cedar slabs and pegged together without nails, was the live capture tool of the frontier. Roughly 3 feet long and 1 foot wide, it had a guillotine-style door held up by a trigger stick connected to a baited treadle inside. When a fox, raccoon, or bobcat stepped on the treadle to reach the bait, the door dropped behind it, and the animal was held alive until the trapper returned. Box traps let a mountain man take fur bearers without damaging the pelt, which could double the value of the hide. By the 1850s, every homestead in the Ohio Valley had at least one box trap sitting on the edge of the cornfield, catching the raccoons that would otherwise eat the harvest. The construction required careful fitting. Too loose and the animal escaped. Too tight and the door stuck. Building one took a full day with only hand tools. Factory-made wire cage traps replaced them after 1920, and the carpentry skills required to build a proper wooden box trap faded with the generation of Americans who grew up splitting their own kindling. Number 9. The fish weir was a stone or wooden fence built across a shallow stream, funneling fish into a narrow opening where they could be speared, netted, or simply scooped out by hand. Cherokee and Catawba hunters had built them for centuries before European settlement, and mountain men adopted the technique wherever they found good trout water. A typical weir used 100 watermelon-sized stones stacked in a V-shaped line pointing downstream, with a wicker basket trap at the apex. During the spring, smelt runs in New England, and the fall whitefish runs in the Great Lakes country. A single weir could produce 200 pounds of fish in a single night. The Massachusetts colonial government actually passed laws in 1709 limiting weir construction because native weirs were so effective they threatened upstream fish populations. Stone weir ruins can still be seen in dozens of Appalachian streams today. Their arrangements of rocks forming ghostly chevrons visible only in summer when the water runs low. But nobody builds them anymore, and the knowledge of how to site, angle, and maintain one is held by archaeologists, not fishermen. Number 8. The GIG, a multi-pronged spear usually forged with 3 barbed tines, was the night hunting tool for frogs, suckers, and any fish that would hold still long enough. A mountain man would tie a pine knot torch to the front of his dugout canoe, drift down a shallow creek at midnight, and spear whatever showed itself in the flickering orange light. The barbs kept speared fish from wiggling off, and a skilled gigger could fill a burlap sack with bullfrogs in a single hour. In the Ozark Mountains and the swamplands of Louisiana, gigging was a social tradition as much as a food-gathering method, with families going out together on warm summer nights and cooking their catch over driftwood fires on sandbars. By the 1960s, most states had regulated gigging heavily because it was too efficient and depleted fish populations in small streams. The forged multi-tine gig head, once available at every country hardware store for 50 cents, is now a specialty item sold online. Most young people in Ozark counties have never held one. Number 7. The trot line was the quiet workhorse of frontier fishing, a length of heavy cord stretched across a river or lake with as many as 50 baited hooks dangling from it on shorter droppers. A mountain man would set a trot line at dusk, bait it with cut shade or live crawfish, and run it at dawn, pulling in whatever catfish, walleye, or bass had taken the hooks overnight. A good trot line on the Mississippi in 1855 could produce 80 pounds of fish in a single night, enough to feed a family for a week or to smoke and trade at the next settlement. The knots alone, splicing the droppers to the main line, tying secure loops, rigging swivels to prevent twisting, required knowledge that took a boy years to master. Commercial fishing lines replaced handmade ones by 1900, but trot lining remained legal and popular in most southern states. Today, fewer than 2% of American anglers have ever set one, and the braiding skills that went into making a proper line are preserved mainly by boat riggers and traditional craftsmen. Number 6. Bolas were 3 stone weights tied to the ends of braided rawhide cords. They were the long-range entangling weapon that mountain men learned from gaucho traders in the Southwest. A skilled thrower could whip a bolas around his head twice, release it at a running pronghorn, and have the 3 cords wrap around the animal's legs, bringing it down without damaging the hide. In the 1830s, American trappers working the Santa Fe Trail picked up bolas from Mexican vaqueros and found them ideal for hunting on open prairie where a rifle shot would scatter an entire herd. The stones weighed about 8 ounces each and had to be carefully matched so they flew true. The cords, usually 3 feet long, were braided from strips of elk or buffalo rawhide. A bolas cost nothing but labor to make, made no noise in flight, and could be retrieved and reused indefinitely. The technique was largely forgotten by American hunters after 1860 as firearms became cheaper and more widespread. Today, bolas throwing is a historical curiosity practiced by maybe a few hundred hobbyists nationwide, though gauchos in Argentina still use them daily. Number 5. The blowgun, nearly 6 feet long and hollowed from river cane, was the silent hunting weapon of the Cherokee Nation and was adopted by Scots-Irish settlers in the southern Appalachians by 1800. The cane was cut green, dried straight in a rack, and bored out with a red-hot iron rod until the inside was smooth as glass. Darts were made from locust wood splinters, fletched with thistledown, and tipped with sharpened hickory points. A good blowgun could drive a dart through a squirrel at 30 feet with enough force to kill, and the only sound was a soft puff of breath. Cherokee hunters in the early 1800s could put 10 darts in a silver dollar at that distance. The blowgun was especially valuable for taking small game in the dense laurel thickets of the Great Smokies, where a rifle shot would echo for miles and spook every deer in the hollow. One of the last traditional Cherokee blowgun makers, a craftsman named Hayes Losiah, died in 2016. With him went 200 years of accumulated knowledge about cane selection, straightening, and boring. Number 4. The fire-hardened spear was the most primitive tool on this list and also the most versatile. A mountain man stranded without other weapons could cut a straight sapling of dogwood or ash, whittle one end to a point, then slowly rotate the tip over a low fire until the wood turned dark brown and rock hard. The heat drove moisture out of the cellular structure of the wood, leaving behind a point that could be honed sharper than many steel blades and would not break on impact. A 6-foot fire-hardened spear could kill a wild hog, spear a salmon, or hold off a mountain lion. Early frontier journals from Daniel Boone's 1769 Kentucky expedition describe making fire-hardened spears when powder ran low, and the technique was taught in Boy Scout handbooks as late as 1965. The skill required was in the rotation, keeping the wood just above scorching temperature for 20 or 30 minutes to drive out moisture without charring the surface. Today, the technique is taught only in primitive survival schools, and the vast majority of outdoorsmen could not produce a functional spear if their lives depended on it. Number 3. The foothold wolf set, banned outright in 38 states today, was the most effective and most controversial predator trap ever devised on the frontier. A mountain man would dig a shallow bed in a game trail, set a heavy Newhouse number 14 or number 150 long spring trap with 14-inch jaws, cover it carefully with sifted dirt, and anchor it with a drag log heavy enough to slow a struggling wolf, but light enough that the animal could not simply tear free and run. The bait was typically a rotting carcass placed 15 feet away, positioned so the wolf had to step directly onto the hidden trap to reach it. In the 1870s and 1880s, professional wolfers working the northern plains could take 300 wolves in a winter at $4 a hide, earning fortunes before the wolf population collapsed. The traps are now illegal across most of the country because they are indiscriminate, catching eagles, dogs, and the occasional human. The knowledge of how to set one properly, how to mask scent, how to anchor it, how to dispatch a trapped animal humanely, was passed through generations of trappers and now exists only in scattered old handbooks and the memories of a few aging professionals. Number 2. The atlatl, a carved wooden throwing stick that extended the hunter's arm by 3 feet, predated the bow in the Americas by 10,000 years and was still used by some mountain men as a silent alternative to the rifle. The device was essentially a short lever, about 24 inches long, with a hook at one end that engaged the bias of a lightweight spear called a dart. Using the atlatl's leverage, a skilled thrower could launch a dart at 100 miles per hour and drop a deer at 40 yards. Pennsylvania Dutch settlers in the 1700s adopted the atlatl from the Lenape and used it for hunting in forests where a rifle was too loud or too bulky. The wooden throwing stick itself took a week to carve and balance, with a weight added near the hook to increase the snap of the throw. By 1850, firearms had made the atlatl nearly obsolete in North America, though it survived in a few isolated Appalachian communities into the early 1900s. Modern atlatl competitions exist in a few states, but the hunting tradition, the ability to feed a family with a carved stick and a bundle of darts, is gone. Number 1. The Green River knife was the single most important tool a mountain man ever owned, a wide-bladed, thin-bellied skinner forged at the Russell Cutlery Factory in Green River, Massachusetts, starting in 1834. Selling for 75 cents at the annual Rendezvous, a Green River knife had a 6-inch carbon steel blade, a simple wooden handle riveted through the tang, and an edge that could be stropped to razor sharpness on a piece of boot leather. The knife was used for everything: skinning beaver, butchering elk, carving wood, eating meals, shaving, fighting. The phrase "up to Green River" entered frontier slang, meaning to do something completely or go all the way, because the blade was often driven hilt deep during close combat. Every trapper carried at least one Green River, and some carried 3. Jedediah Smith was killed by Comanches on the Cimarron in 1831 with a Green River knife in his hand. The Russell cutlery operated well into the late 1800s, and surviving Green River knives from the fur trade era now sell for thousands of dollars at auction. The craft of hand forging a proper skinning knife, balanced for hours of wet work, sharp enough to slice through tough hide without tearing, is now almost entirely lost to the American toolkit. We buy our meat pre-cut in plastic trays and have no need for a blade that once fed a man for a lifetime. Across all 25 entries, from the humble rabbit stick that opened our list to the legendary Green River knife at the very top, these lost hunting tools tell the story of a vanished America, one where a man's survival depended on the tools he built with his own hands. The figure 4 deadfall, the Hawken Rifle, the fire-hardened spear, each one represented generations of accumulated knowledge, passed down at campfires and workshop benches from fathers to sons. When the supermarket replaced the hunt and the factory replaced the forge, most of these skills quietly disappeared. But they are not gone entirely. Somewhere in the hollows of Appalachia and the high country of the Rockies, a few old hands still know. The question is whether we will learn from them before the last of them are gone.